Hey, welcome to another episode of Pop of the Morning. This is your co-host, Phil, and with me as always is...
your other co-host, Kathy Lee Gifford. And this is the morning show. The morning show that takes a look at the pop culture that has wormed its way into the back of your head. The kind of throwaway references that you think mean nothing, but really say everything about where your head is at. Do you find yourself, mid-conversation referencing that one episode of Simpsons that is just like that thing that your friend just said in real life? Well, then this is the show for you, because we're here to plumb the depths of your subconscious, to press rewind on the VHS tape that is your childhood, and ask the questions: how did the pop culture that we have imbibed in our years on this planet, how has that pop culture shaped the way we see the world? Phil, is that a fair summary of the show?
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's all.
Speaking of VHS hits, right? This week we are talking about the film Harold and Maude from 1971. Yeah. It's one of the oldest movies we've ever looked at on this show, but I think it's an appropriate topic for the show because it's a movie that when it was released in 1971, it was a bomb.
Yeah.
This movie was panned by most critics. It did not do well. Studios and a lot of audiences didn't know what to make of this film, frankly, because to this day there's really not a lot of other films like it. Even this far, 51 years on, there's not much like it. But Harold and Maude gained a second life in late night showings on college campuses, on the home video market, which is where you and I encountered it. I remember Harold and Maude. I became aware of this film probably at the same moment that you did. We had a math teacher, a geometry teacher in high school who frankly, I found him in one way to be an intimidating man, but also I really admire his approach. How most math teachers come into the class and they've got like this very canned script and they're working from pre-completed examples. This guy would pick a random question from the homework, work it on his old school overhead projector with the little dry erase marker, and if he was stumped, it meant no homework for the whole class. And he, from time to time, was stumped. And I remember it was one day where he couldn't complete the example, elegantly at least, got himself all turned around, and so he turned off the projector, and he started talking to us about this little movie, Harold and Maude. I have the vinyl soundtrack here, which I picked up at the last record store day, featuring the songs of Cat Stevens. But, that was an unorthodox math teacher who I found confusing, a little bit frightening at first. But once I really came to understand who he was, I realized he had kind of an unorthodox approach to teaching and to life, and really came to admire and respect that guy. So I don't know, it's probably an overstatement to call him my Maude, but I do. If you're out there listening, Mr. Math Teacher, I do appreciate you.
My God.
Thanks for showing me that there are other ways to do things in life.
I had one math teacher in my head, but then as soon as he said I admire him, I automatically knew it wasn't that guy. But it was. Yeah, I remember that guy. I just remember overwhelming silence in his class and him playing Minesweeper nonstop, almost nonstop. And then he called out people too. One guy was like, "Yeah, I did it in my head." He's like, "Oh, you did it in your head? Cool." And he wrote down an equation. He's like, "Now do this one." And we just sat there with silence as this kid awkwardly Yeah. Oh, it was great.
Yeah. He was an interesting man.
Yeah, but
Harold and Maude, Phil, starring Bud Cort and Vivian Pickles as his mother, and Ruth Gordon co-stars as Maude. Those are the three big players in this film.
It's interesting.
Directed by Harold Ashby. Hal Ashby.
Harold and Maude is, we talk about pop culture. It's one of those films. It's a cult film that I don't think a lot of people have seen, and like mainstream people have seen, but it has seeped into pop culture. I googled Harold and Maude just to see if there's who was talking about it. nobody was talking about. It was all just clips and trailers. But then they had a Family Guy clip where it was just like it was a reference to Harold and Maude. It was like, you guys are like Harold and Maude. What will your grandkids think? And then it was Stewie giving that priest discussion after Harold says he's going to marry Maude, and he's like, "Your firm body." Writhing with this.
It's a very, very Family Guy reference.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that it's definitely pop culture, but probably a lot of people have not directly seen the film. It's just one of these like hidden things that a lot of creators have probably seen. And so it's interesting. When I watched it the other day, and my mom was watching it with me, and we finished. And she was like, "This is your next film you're talking about in the podcast?" I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "How are you going to talk about this? What are you going to say about this?" And I was like, and I honestly was like, I don't know. Hopefully I'll come up with something by the time I get to it. And, looking at it, it's so... It feels like what we talked about last time with Rushmore. We didn't do this on purpose, but Harold and Maude is like a perfect double feature with Rushmore, I feel like, because it has...
Well, break it down. Explain that to me.
It has a lot of the cinematography is very similar. Mm-hmm. A lot of...
It's very deliberate, very carefully composed.
A lot of that indie style. But it also... There's a lot of what's being said with Harold and Maude is just like this literary... cannot be 100% defined subtext in a lot of ways, where you do not you don't know where Maude is coming from. I mean, she has, and I didn't know this until much later when, like, this was a few years ago I found this out, but she had like a concentration camp tattoo, and she makes references to before the war and their hardships and her immigration into America, and so you have this mysterious background that she has that kind of, and like, not enforces, but her background is why she is how she is. And you can't make a clear connection. So she's this mysterious figure to Harold. And Harold, being this weird gothic kid, seems a little bit more clear-cut to who he is, but when they start interacting, it all becomes this like mysterious, strange.
Right. Well, it's chemistry, and a lot of it can only be expressed through metaphor and symbolism, and that's one of the beautiful things about film when it's really firing on all cylinders. I think Hal Ashby's editing and directing in this film is just on point. Maude's background as a Holocaust survivor is literally unspoken.
Yes.
It is subtext. It is you get this little glimpse of her tattoo in this carefully executed zoom shot that after she rolls up her sleeve, and Harold gets a glimpse. That's the first time he's seen it, as well as the first time you see him notice it. You see him react to it. I love that comparison to Rushmore, and I think it's interesting too, because in a lot of ways they're both about these spring and winter kind of relationships between an older person, not necessarily always wiser in the case of Rushmore in particular, and a younger person. In Harold and Maude, Harold is, well, there wasn't a word for what Harold was when this movie was made in 1971. Today we might call him emo if we were being careless. Yeah. We might call him goth. He dresses in drab clothing. This is a couple of years after the Summer of Love, and here you have this boy who comes from a rich and privileged background. The world ostensibly should be his oyster, and yet he seems to be only obsessed with sort of his oddball status and the sense of alienation he has from figures of authority. You know, the movie does an awesome job. We don't name these figures of authority, but we see them in a list. He keeps interacting with with the priest that you alluded to earlier, right? So religion gives him no solace. He's sort of, gets nothing from the arbitrary rules of religion, which he's inherited, but don't speak to his experience of life. You've got his therapist.
I love those.
And the
scenes.
Therapist asks him these deep questions, right? And Harold basically shrugs in response. The therapist starts sort of...
I didn't notice this before, but he dresses the exact same way as his therapist, too. He's always dressed
as his therapist,
as a mirror.
and he's this teenage kid.
Beautiful.
And one of my favorites, right, is you've got the military, right? The military maybe is going to be his answer, right? He needs a purpose. Fundamentally, Harold is looking for a purpose in life, and he feels no thrill, no reason to live. And so maybe the military is going to be it. That's like what his mom suggests. And so you meet this uncle of his who is this gung-ho, high-ranking officer who lost an arm in service and tells these bloody war stories. But he's missing his arm, and he's got this, like, apparatus rigged up so that he can still... His shirt sleeve can come up and do a salute when he pulls a string with his remaining hand. And I love the way that Harold blows him off, inspired by Maude, with this fantastically over-enthusiastic just outpouring of questions. Are you going to teach me how to kill a man? To strangle him? To squeeze the life from him with my bare hands? And finally, even this military man who was told these horribly violent stories is now unnerved by Harold's enthusiasm for killing. This movie, I can understand your mom's reaction, right? Because this movie, it is taking dead aim at the guardrails that we've built for ourselves in society. You think about these institutions that Harold is confronting, right? He seems to be like a dejected college student. That's not working out for him. He's not impressed by religion, by therapy, by military and service, right? All of these artificial constructs, these inherited forms of wisdom, they're like Cliff's Notes for the meaning of life, right? That we find ourselves, that we inherit. We show up on the planet and someone's already written these sort of instruction manuals for how you should be. And Harold's fundamental problem is none of these things speak to him. And then he has, on top of this domineering mother who has very good intentions for him. She means very well, but she's tempting. Again, there was no word for what she was at the time. We would today call her maybe like a helicopter mother. My favorite bit with the mom is where she's filling out his electronic dating questionnaire, and she starts, but she's ostensibly asking him what he thinks, and she starts out asking, but she always answers before he can. And then finally, she just starts saying, like, one of the questions is does the media exploit sex, right? And now she's not even pretending to ask him anymore. She says, oh, yes, my yes. Oh, I think so. And now it's just literally the personal pronoun I after a certain point in the list. She's not even saying we. She's not even pretending to nod toward Harold. She's just saying.
There was like a personal question. It's like, do you find yourself like overwhelmed at times? It's like, oh, I certainly do. I certainly do. It's like,
that's the transition point. And Harold is just sinking lower into his chair, right? Just kind of, again, he's not.
Well, he's
not. So he gets these electronically paired dates, but they're dates perfectly paired to his mother and not him.
Yeah,
it's hopeless.
And well, you see that whenever they come over, the mother's interacting with them and talking to the girls. Well, Harold is out in the garden or working on his car. He's always out doing something else
or staging an elaborate faux suicide, which should be mentioned. If you've never seen this movie, what are you doing listening to this show? But it should be mentioned, right? There's that suicide is absolutely a theme that runs through this film from start to finish, and
he tells a story at the beginning. I mean, it's funny. You said his mother's like a helicopter mom or well intentioned. I don't think she. I don't know. Maybe she is in some ways, but she's also got this distance to her. This very put upon distance to her that I think money and high society kind of creates. Like, she has to have this distance with her child, because he tells this story to Maude where he blows up this lab while he's at boarding school. So he's away at this time, and he runs back home, and the cops show up and tell his mother that he's dead. And his mother, and he says his mother gasps, sends her arms out, clutches somebody's arms, and freezes for a moment, and then dramatically falls into a cop's arms. Like it's this whole staged emotional way of...
Oh, I don't... That's interesting. You read that as staged or inauthentic. Yeah. To me, I read that as the one moment where he saw in his mom a true expression of emotion and love. That one moment where she thought he died. Yeah. That was the flood of emotion that is lacking in every other one of their interactions. Yeah. I agree with you. She has this patrician, sort of distanced, aloof facade, and you're right. She can give him everything. They are wealthy beyond your and my imagination. Right. She can just casually buy him
Jaguar.
A Jaguar, right? She just casually can buy this. They live in a fantastic manor house. She obviously can put him through boarding schools, and money is no object. And she's a great metaphor, I think, for modern society in a lot of ways. We have all of this material wealth. We are surrounded by food, by entertainment, by creature comforts, air conditioning and heat. We never have to sweat unless we choose to. We live these lives that would have blown away the imaginations of our ancestors. And yet what is the thing that is arguably missing from all of that industrialized comfort? It's the love. It's the sense of belonging and community. And so he's this isolated boy. And so to me, the suicide is him trying to... The fake suicides are him trying to provoke that one outpouring of authentic emotion that he's ever seen from his mom. He doesn't want money. He wants a freaking hug.
I think he saw it as... I agree with you. And I think he saw it as... an outpouring of emotion, but the way it sounded to me was at a stage, and I feel like he came to that realization that it was like this dramatic form of emotion, because when he meets Maude and interacts with her, he's at a loss because she has this real response to the world, to living, to life. Everything, every action she has is like a real action. It's not staged. It's not for fun. It's not,
She's authentic, and her reactions are unmediated. Yeah. She is just reacting to the moment, and wears that old cliche of wearing your heart on the sleeve. Exactly. Right? She doesn't even have barely has the sleeve. Right? It's just out in the open.
So I think to him, it was a dramatic. He saw this finally this release of emotion from his mother, but I also think that he later on, especially after meeting Maude, saw it as it wasn't a real release of emotion from his mother. She was still reserved. She was still playing this part, because that interaction is just the way he described it seemed such a staged thing. It did not seem to me like and my mother fell apart. No, it was like she gasped, and then she put her arm out, and held herself for a moment, and then collapsed in the arms.
That's interesting.
And that sounds like you're staging a play. That sounds like, could you do this? That sounds like that's what it sounds like when he's describing it. So the way he describes it to me makes me think that he either finally saw it as that, or maybe he saw it the whole time. I can't tell you which one, but I feel like he's like, this, my mother's reaction is not a genuine reaction.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're talking about subtle shades.
Right,
of
No.
here.
I think so, too. Because I think he's also looking, he's obviously looking for something from his mom or from somebody, because he's living in that house so isolated, so alone. And
he's looking for love and feeling and spontaneity in a world where again he arrives in the latter half of the 20th century where everything is supposed to be figured out and mapped out and society has all the rules in place, and there's no place. There's no pre-accepted path for the guy who wants to chart his own path. Like, that's the conundrum of Harold.
Well, this was written as a thesis by like a 20-something-year-old originally, and then it took a while to get, and so it was brought out in 1971. So theoretically, it was written probably in like 69, 70, right around like the end of like the Age of Aquarius. But this is definitely like rooted in that Age of Aquarius idea of like, as you were talking about, the authority figures are hollow. His mother is a hollow representation of motherhood. Like the police are hollow representations of authority. The priest is hollow representation of religion. I think about that. What really clicked for me was the connection between that scene with him describing his mom, fainting. And then also when Harold and Maude are trying to plant that car and that cop stops him for that last time and he goes, "Stop or I'm going to shoot."
Trying to plant the tree.
Trying to plant the car. Plant the tree. They stole that car and plant the tree. And
it's great. It's the smog choked tree.
They're trying to rescue it and go plant it for.
He's like, "We can't take this. It's public property."
Like, exactly.
We're gonna plant it in a forest in the clean air.
And there's a cop on a bike that.
What a great metaphor for Harold, man.
And there's a cop on a bike that she eludes a couple times, and then they steal his bike, and he goes, "Stop, or I'm going to shoot." And he raises his gun up and he fires it, and it just goes click. It's empty. It's impotent.
It's empty.
There's nothing there.
Right.
It's hollow. It's
great.
It's the same as the performance by his mother. It's the same as his meetings with the therapist. It's the same as the lectures from the priest. There's all these authorities.
Yeah.
All this authority that is being put upon them is hollow, because
and
I don't know.
Because why is anyone doing anything? They're just performing a prescribed role, an inherited role that they've never really examined themselves, right? And that's why these people have no useful advice for him. They don't mean it. They don't believe it themselves. It's something someone told them. It's something they read in a book. And I love that you bring up that instant of him shooting the gun and nothing happening except the click. There's so much in our lives, so many times in our lives, where we do things because we think we have to, right? Because we that's what you do. It's the polite thing, or what will people think of me if I dress a certain way, or if I don't go to the party, or you could go down that list, so far down that list. If I give up this good paying job because it doesn't satisfy me, if I question some of the basic things, right? And what happens when you defy custom, when you break with tradition to do something that is more authentic to your inner self, to your inner truth? What usually happens? It's the empty, hollow click of that gun. If we're being real about it, no one cares. No one cares about a lot of those important key things. I think that's a great insight that you bring up.
And I think
more to.
I was going to say, and I think that's what the relationship between Harold and Maude is. Harold he sees the hollowness, but he doesn't know how to respond to it. He's I imagine like walking down a hallway, and he knows that on the other side there's nothing. Like the walls in the hallway are just cardboard, but he doesn't know. But he has to keep walking down the hallway because he doesn't know how else to get out of it. And Maude is like, "Oh no, you just walk around, or you just push it over. Like this is nothing.
You take the key in your pocket and you cut a little hole in the cardboard. And you can step right through. Out. It's just that easy." She sees it's hollow, and then she even says, and she she did the protesting when she was younger as like a suffragette and some other peaceful protests. Well, not so peaceful protests because she had the umbrella to protect her. But she says she does now. She protests in her own little way.
in her own personal way, and I think that's her, show. And she even says I'm here to remind people that easy come, easy go. She's showing the hollowness of this authority, because this structure of this authority means like very little in the face of actually life and death with human beings. It's like,
yeah, man,
and she's doing that while he's like stuck in this, and so his only escape is pretending to die. Like he's like, I have no way of getting out of this. Like,
yeah, because he doesn't have the lived experience. I think that's a really insightful dichotomy that you bring up. You have Harold the youth, who is obsessed with death because he's recognized the hollowness of so much of what we call life, daily life. And you have Maude, who has confronted death. She is the elderly person who instinctively should to us represent death. Her withered, her withered body, as the priest points out, right? She should represent, this darkness and this death, especially since she's, again, literally faced it in the Holocaust. As a survivor of the Holocaust, she lost loved ones in the Holocaust. She has seen the most horrible things that anyone could imagine. And again, I think that has to call into question some of the inanity, the silliness of the mundane things, right? The silly things that we put ourselves through. Yeah. They both have seen death, and her answer is, well, yeah, but none of this silly stuff matters. Live your life. So the old woman who's actually experienced the darkness of death is obsessed with life. The young man, who, again, by all accounts, should be the world is his oyster, to borrow another cliche, can't see anything except for the fact that it's all fake. And I love that metaphor you bring up of the cardboard hallway or the walls. There's so many times in this movie where Maude makes reference to borders and walls. For example, there's one point where she says, at one time I used to break into pet shops to liberate the canaries, but I decided that was an idea way before its time. Zoos are full, prisons are overflowing. Oh my, how the world still dearly loves a cage. Yeah. And in that same scene, when they're in her little, she's living like in a train car. Her home is literally representative of motion and movement and transition. That's where she makes her home. She has just made reference to the fact that she used her umbrella for fighting in the old protests. Yeah. And Harold says, well, what were you fighting for? And Maude says, oh, big issues. Liberty, rights, justice. Kings died, kingdoms fell. I don't regret the kingdoms. What sense in borders, nations, patriotism? But I miss the kings. And so there's this symbolism over and over again of exactly what you're talking about. The walls, the cages, the prisons, and that ties right into that symbolism of the hollowness of these institutions that are failing Bud and why do I keep referring to the actor's name, Harold? Harold and so many other people. Young people, I think, are the most apt to respond to this film because they're the ones who society says should be looking for their purpose. But it's so funny in life how we always have to label things, and we talk about like a midlife crisis or a quarter life crisis is a new one I've heard. Yeah. We talk about all of these different transitions in people's lives where it's like it's real hard. The empty nest syndrome, right? Or the kind of people who are afraid to stop working because they don't know what they do with their leisure in retirement. And if you think about it, these are all people who are sensing like maybe just how easy it would be to push on the wall that's keeping them in, but they're a little bit scared of what might happen if they actually pushed through, if they actually made it to the other side, because the wall is, I don't know, it keeps you safe, it keeps you in, it keeps you safe from society's judgment for sure. Yeah. Your mom would be happier, or at least Harold's mom would be happier if you just stayed on that narrow path.
Yeah.
I think the other powerful image in this movie, there's a few of them. The other powerful image in this is a movie that's really obsessed and interested with like plant life and growth.
Yeah.
So like the tree is something that you already brought up in some detail. This withered tree that's planted in a little. We've all seen these in downtown areas where it's like a tiny little square that's cut out of the concrete.
A tree and
this tree is sad.
That only have a circumference of like 5 inches maybe ever in its life, because
that's it. That's all it's ever allotted, right? Because it's literally right through the little metal grate. That's real. That's real big picture planning. Thank you, urban architects. And that's what they choose to liberate. And so, Harold is that tree. He's scrawny and underdeveloped and pallid, washed out. He is not thriving. He's choking on the smog of our industrialized society, just like that tree is. That tree is in a little cage that we make for trees, a little gap that we build into the pavement. It's another way of saying that is it's a box for trees or a cage for trees.
Yeah.
And then the other metaphor that struck me in terms of like plant life is that Maude says, I should like to change into a sunflower most of all. They're so tall and simple. And then she asks Harold, what kind of flower would you like to be? He says he'd like to be the they're like in this little patch of daisies, right? And he'd like to be one of the daisies, right? Because they're all alike, he says. And Maude says, oh, but they're not. Look, see, some are smaller, some are fatter, some grow to the left and some grow to the right. Some even have lost some petals. All kinds of observable differences, right? And this idea that like part of the problem in life is that we live our lives as if we're all the same, because on first glance, I guess we are, right? Like we're all human beings. We all have some of the basic same needs, but that doesn't mean we all fit in the same box. But when you really zoom in, there's so many differences, and we don't really build a society that acknowledges, accepts, celebrates, accommodates for all of those differences, right? And so much of our human misery, so much of our existential ennui is rooted in this fact that, like, we're taking this macro view of things and saying, well, everybody's circumstance is the same. We're all just like the daisies, right? We're all just like the daisies. And I love how the camera at that point, you mentioned the cinematography earlier, comparing it to Wes Anderson. I think that's one moment where it really shines out, because we zoom out from them and realize that this patch of daisies, which is so profound, each one unique, they zoom out and they're actually in like some kind of military cemetery, graveyard, and it's all of these completely identical white headstones. And it's one of those things where words fail it. I'm trying to describe it now, but you really have to just go back and watch that scene. It's one that kind of chokes me up every time. Yeah. It's the flowers are everything. Look at the the artwork on the reissue of the vinyl record. The flowers are everywhere, and I think that is just such a pivotal scene in this movie.
Yeah. Well, her line is something like, it's like, I think the biggest issue, like something with the biggest issue with life, is that everyone thinks everyone is this, but they think they're these. And so it's like everyone is this. Yeah. Everyone is this. They're a flower, and they think they're these. And that's when they do that zoom out, and they're like, everyone thinks they're dead or the same heads. It's like this mind blowing.
You can finish that like sort of simile, that metaphor, however you like, right? Everyone thinks they're an identical granite tombstone, and what do? You get a boring dead life, a life that doesn't resemble life at all. When really they're all these, right? The little daisies that, as she pointed out, are unique and wonderful and not at all the same, because we're not comfortable with acknowledging or saying aloud how different we are. I mean, again, how many times do you have like this thought in your head every day that people are crazy?
Yeah.
that the things that society calls normal and sane and rational and necessary are almost all negotiable.
Yeah.
We were coming through a pandemic in which society, in so many ways, it stopped, right? And we all were in our homes for some amount of time. Many of us missed work for some amount of time, or we began working from home. Some of us quit our jobs. School was on pause. And I'm not saying that all of those things had 100% beneficial outcomes. It's a mixed bag, as everything is in life. But weirdly, the world has kept moving on. All the things that we thought were necessary. Student debts were paused. The 5-day work week suddenly became something that was open for debate.
Yeah.
I feel like there's this massive, hopefully once in a lifetime kind of event that we've just lived through. If anything, it should all make us a little bit more like Maude and recognize just how much of life is up for negotiation. The world is still spinning, man. They paused student loan payments for 18 months, and the world is still spinning.
I think it woke up a lot of people to how hollow systems and authority are, which is a great thing. Which I think is another thing from this film, where it's like Maude is doing the work of like taking the piss out of authority, because she's seen what systems and authority really does when it's taken too seriously, when it's taken to the furthest edges of reasonableness, or not even reasonable, just the furthest edges of what a human is capable of, and it's not pretty. So the more authority, the more we allow authority and systems to, cage us in, the worse off we would be. And I think, like you said, the pandemic really allowed a lot of people to see. They allowed to see the cardboard walls sway a little bit, and now they're like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah. Well, again, you bring up going to the edge, staring into the abyss, and this is just striking me now. So maybe this isn't as profound to anyone else who's listening, but you think about what the Holocaust was. It was many things, but one of the things it was first and foremost was a consequence of listening too closely to people who were given absolute authority, right? Or let's rephrase that, who have seized absolute authority for themselves without earning it. Let's put it that way. They've seized fascism. Yeah. Fascism, if anything, right, it's like the ultimate in strict rules, narrow paths, prescribed existence, authoritarianism.
Yeah,
and again, she was taken to the brink by that exact kind of mentality of, well, it's just the way it is, and I'm just following orders, and therefore I must do what society compels me to do, even if it means killing millions of people, being the soldier who flips the switch. I don't have any particular argument with you. I'm told to do this.
It's just policy, man. So therefore my humanity is not a part of it. And we see
just policy. That's why the kids must starve. That's why the family must be evicted.
And we see that,
right?
Yeah.
It's just policy.
We see that to a lesser extent in like just capitalism and business, and business as usual is like, oh yeah, you're
the grocery store that locks its dumpster after it throws out the bread, right? To make sure that the homeless can't retrieve the bread. It must be destroyed. It's just policy.
Oh God. Or you get 2 or 3 days of bereavement if somebody close to you passed away, but it's like you got to come in and finish and work. It's just policy, man.
72 hours.
Hope your grief is
to get
done.
Your house in order. Time's up.
Oh my God.
Yeah. You have 10 PTO days, and if you go beyond that, we can't be held accountable for what happens. It's the policy. I know I'm the boss. I know this is my company, but policy cannot be negotiated.
Policy, systems, authority, all are here to separate us from humanity. What's that
Yeah, man.
It's that thing. You remember it much better than I. But Karl Marx talks about that removal, like that the job when you're doing like something on the job. I can't remember the actual term for it. It removes the humanity from us.
Working?
Yeah, like no, but something. God, I can't remember the terms, but
yeah. Well, capitalism alienates us from our
that's
labor,
what it is.
right?
Jesus fucking Christ!
And
that's why I was.
If you think about it, right? Work at its core, doing something with your hands, creating something with your mind, putting your sweat equity into something that is an almost sacred thing.
Yeah.
You have this connection. You've transformed your environment. You've put food on the table. You went out into the wilds to bring it back, or you worked in the field to bring it back. You prepared it in the kitchen. Your back aches from being hunched over to do this labor. It's a sacred sacrifice, and yet we've invented an entire system, an entire society that says, well, actually, right? You don't own anything you just created. I arbitrate what your labor is worth, and I reap the actual benefits of this, right? And there is that's the Karl Marx version of that. But we do live in a society whether it's literally alienated from your labor, we're alienated from ourselves and our instincts. We're alienated from each other, like Harold is from his mom. It's frankly a pretty nightmarish reality we've created for ourselves. I think that this movie, you bring up Marx, but in terms of also other 19th century thinkers, you could also bring up Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau, who famously, at the advent and the dawn of the industrial age, is so blown away by the rapid speed of the steam engine, which comes blistering past at like 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And he says life has picked up pace to an inhuman speed. Man is not meant to move at such a speed. And he retreats from society to go live in a shack by Walden Pond and try to live deliberately. And if you've ever read his book, which is an accounting of that experience, it's called Walden. There's a whole chapter where he's talking about the rate at which his peas or his green beans are growing in the garden, and he's recognizing the individual differences between each one of the plants. It's a very Harold and Maude scene. He talks about being distrustful of any kind of enterprise that requires you to buy new clothes. he talks about noticing like the changing shadows as they come through the leaves as the seasons cycle through. And so I think this movie also has a lot in common with that kind of philosophy, Thoreau's philosophy of living deliberately, being thoughtful about how you spend your hours. We have a precious, finite number of those things on this planet, of being very aware that interactions with that outside world, the kind of things that we do that we think are non-negotiable are in almost every case very much negotiable. If you're privileged enough, I suppose they're negotiable. Phil, can I ask you something that I found perplexing?
Sure.
About this film that I'm not sure I can answer. I love this conversation. I feel like we're coming to greater bits of clarity. I always love talking to you about these movies because, like you say, sometimes it's hard to put these things into words, what you've seen, to articulate your thoughts and feelings. One thing that I really wrestle with in this movie is, spoiler alert, Maude's suicide.
Yeah.
She makes a very deliberate decision. She's seemingly in fine health, right? She's seemingly, I guess maybe she says almost right before she announces this decision to kill herself in a scene or two before, that Harold makes her feel young again.
Yeah.
And then on her 80th birthday, she swallows pills before Harold arrives to celebrate with her, she tells him it's, her last minutes on Earth. What do you make of that?
Honestly, I don't know. I wish I'd gone back to an earlier scene and rewatched it, because she mentions at a time that, like, when she first mentions her, like, it's going to be her birthday, like, in a week or something, and she goes, I turned 80, and she says something along the lines of, like, if I died when I was 75, that's too soon, but 85 seems a little too late, or something like that. So for whatever reason, that seems like it seems like a perfect time for her, but I don't know. I honestly have trouble with that too. It seems like such a wild thing to do, but it also seems reasonable. Not reasonable, but it seems like it aligns with her character to have this kind of control over her death that she won't allow herself to age or whatever, or just go through the society in a way that she doesn't want to. And she's like, well, I just wanted to head out at this time for whatever reason it is, and that's just the way it's going to be. And it's just her taking control of it. It reminds me of, like, when I first found out about Hunter S. Thompson. He lived this crazy wild life, like, really, he was like Maude, but like, he pushed a lot of borders and just, like, out there going nuts.
Definitely darker.
Much darker.
Yeah.
But he also just, like, ended it because he wanted to. He just, like, ended it in, like, his 70s or something like that. Yeah. And apparently he had mentioned that before, that he was going to, like, go out on his own terms, and that was, like, his plan, like, to do it for him.
Yeah.
Do it himself. And I cannot wrap my head around it. Being somebody who has struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts, it's hard for me, now that I'm in a good place and taking medication, to say that if I reach 75, 80, whatever it is, that I would want to be, I would want to exit. But so I can't imagine what, Maude doing that in her, like, why she would do that. That's been a shocking thing. That was a shocking thing for me then, and was still when I watched it, because she does seem like she's still doing quite well for 79, for 80, and doesn't seem to be on the wane. But I don't.
Maybe
I don't know.
But when you put it like that, I guess you kind of do answer my question, because like, you mentioned that it's in keeping with Maude's character as we've seen her. She lives according to her own ways, her own logic, her own rules. There's a way in which she is as in control of her life as anyone can be. When the cop pulls her over and says, how long have, where's your license? She said, don't have one, don't believe him. Well, how long have you been driving? I'd say about 45 minutes. We were hoping to get it started a little sooner, but, she gives herself license to do so many things. She's not looking for some hollow authority to do it. And so I guess it is actually in keeping with her character that maybe it is her happiness. Maybe it's the moment. It's the way the sun is coming through the trees. The light of the sun is coming through the trees, and she just realized this is the moment. My work is done. I think there is something too in which that is one of the final things that I think fully serves to push Harold.
Yeah.
I guess you could, depending on your perspective, back on track in his life, or fully off the track that is prescribed to him. because Harold up to that time is so obsessed with death. Harold and Maude, we didn't even mention, they meet because they both, for their own reasons, attend other people's funerals for entertainment, for fun, for satisfaction, for fixation on, I guess they're both drawn to it because it is such a raw emotional event.
Right.
I guess that's what it boils down to. They're both drawn to it for that same fundamental purpose. But Harold is fixated on this death because of his own mistaken death, his mom's reaction. He's fixated on death to the degree that he buys a hearse for himself to drive around in. And when his mom has that thing towed away and junked, he then, in one of the movie's most cartoonish scenes, he manages to himself personally convert this Jaguar into this kooky, crazy, custom sports car hearse. Yeah, it's this great thing again that just continues even that far along in the movie when his mom does that to him. He's still so fixated on death that he wants the hearse to drive, and he's still faking his suicide in front of the dates that his mom is bringing home for him. Though I have to say, his third and final date, he tries to commit hara-kiri, and he has a fake knife, a stage knife that's on a spring, so when he presses it to his chest, it goes into the handle. And the other dates that he brings home, they're scared away by his faked deaths. In this case, though, right, maybe it's just... I love that scene because this is the last time in the movie that he fakes his death.
Yeah.
And it's right before Maude actually kills herself. But this last time that he fakes his death, nobody's convinced. Right? His would-be date is not convinced. She says, that's
joins
great.
in.
She's an aspiring actress, and she says, I could do that too. And she does her own... absurd, a great performance from this actor, over the top, squealing, screaming death. His mom has never been convinced by these fake suicides, and suddenly Harold doesn't seem to be either. And then, it's like this thing that he's about, this cocoon that he's about to cast off, and then pretty much the next thing we get is Maude's 80th birthday and her announcing that she's going to kill herself. And after her death, the climax of this film, the final scene of this film, we see her die, and then we see Harold racing at a breakneck speed up this dirt path. These great scenes of this Jaguar skidding in the dusty road, curving its way, winding its way up to the coastal cliffs of California, and then racing off into the surf, right off the cliff, right into the ocean. And it even pauses in midair, and you see the car floating in midair for a second, and then it drops. And you think to yourself, my God, right? Harold is so distraught by the loss of Maude that he's taken his own life. And actually, again, spoiler alert, we're 18 spoiler alerts in, Harold is standing on the cliff, and all that was a very dramatic way of finally and absolutely shedding off his obsession with death. He casts off that hearse. He dives out of the car apparently at the last second, and he's up there with the banjo singing Cat Stevens. And if you want to sing out, sing out. If you want to be you, be you.
Yeah.
If you want to be me, be me. There's a million ways, right? And he's dancing off, and it's this joyful ending. And so maybe I don't think she's solely doing it for the benefit of Harold, but I do think it's a really important thing for him to actually look death in the eye, what it really means when someone you love goes. Yeah. I think there is something to that he feels inspired to now dedicate his life to the same kind of joy and celebration. Yeah. That Maude did. By the way, Maude was the one who told him, you need to play this banjo. You need to learn how to play a song. It's the cosmic dance. Yeah. It's the it's how we commune with the universe. Like, he couldn't do that before her, and the last thing we see of him is dancing off toward the horizon, singing in her honor, dancing and singing in her honor. I think Maude would have loved it.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I remember that scene, and I was first time I saw it, I was shocked, and I was like, "No, why would he do that?" After going through all of this, and I was like, blown away by it.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's still perplexing with the Maude thing, and I don't think there will ever be an answer unless like the author comes forward and gives a reason. But it's her reason. It's her reason. I mean, that's exactly it, and it's also
none of our business.
Yeah,
maybe.
And I think back to like the only like really vulnerable time in the film is when she's talking about before the war, and this guy who I assume is like her husband or something. He was like a dancer, and he's like he was so serious, and she like turns away, and she actually has tears in her eyes, and I think about like her making some promise to him or some idea to like live to whatever for him, and then once that's done, she's like, I'm out, because it's, I don't know, people have this strong feeling with their significant other, and they go through this stuff, and again, whatever reason it is, but I concoct this imaginary reasoning in my head just from that scene and her, because
headcanon.
It's hard to wrap your head around why she would do that, because you don't want her to go because she's so full of life, but at the same time, I'm someone who believes that someone should be able to end it if they want it to, like they have euthanasia or whatever it is.
Right.
And it's.
I was just going to say this movie, because it's like one of those things where it's like you can be arrested for attempted suicide. Like, it's illegal to commit suicide, and that's just laughable to me. It's just it's insane, and it's like it's her final take on authority. It feels like in a lot of ways. So. Yeah, you're one profound man. I really like that. I think that's true. This movie, in a lot of ways, you could say it's ahead of its time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we still haven't caught up with this movie 50 years later, but I love that observation.
Yeah.
I think that is in part about like that ultimate claiming of, it's me, it's my body, it's my choice, and this arbitrary rule that we've accepted in society that it's not legal, moral, honorable for a person, whether they're elderly, whether they're terminally ill, whatever set of circumstances, whether they're in pain, whether that pain is physical, emotional, that somehow some elected authority has the right to say you are not allowed to do that to yourself. I do actually. I think that's I think you've answered my question beyond my wildest dreams. I think that this movie is staking a claim.
Yeah.
It's not an. This movie is so political.
Yeah.
Even though the only thing we get right is a man in uniform. We get a little shot of Richard Nixon. This would have been at the height of the Vietnam War, but none of that stuff is mentioned explicitly, right? But this movie is so political, right? For Maude, and then for Harold, the personal is political. Right? Everything you do, the choices you make, the way you live your life, it's the little battles that you mentioned earlier that Maude says she's now fighting, right? In her own way, she's still fighting. And like the act of rebellion, the political act is her entire life, right? From her first breath to her last, simply choosing to she's not even rebelling against the system. She's not even acknowledging that the system exists, right, or that it has any authority over her, right?
It's great.
And the flip side of that coin is that for each one of us who sleepwalks through our days, doing things not, because quote unquote we have to.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could ever be Maude, but of course no one could be Maude. Maude is a fictional character. But all the things we do in our lives because we think we have to. I got a promotion, so I have to drive a nicer car, or I gotta move up to a nicer house. Who said you've got to do that, right? I haven't bought a new shirt in a while, right? I need to have such a variety of shirts that no one will remember the last time I wore this one, right? Like this sort of like arbitrary rules we place on ourselves, right? And what would it look like for you and me, for our listeners, if we looked at those things with a little more scrutiny? If you take joy in a variety of shirts, great, good for you. If you like wearing the same 5, cool, right? Like maybe that's the way you're Maude in your life.
Yeah, this film is one of those. We talk most of the time when we talk about how Hollywood is reinforcing the status quo and American status quo, American values, and this is one of those films that got snuck in, and it's just this little this white blood cell that got into the system and is like infecting a couple people at a time with its anti-authority ideas, because it points out, it does what we hope to do in our podcast. It points out the issues with American values, and I also think it points out the issues with Hollywood and everything else mainstream that is out there and considers itself an authority on whatever media or medium. And Harold and Maude is pop culture, but it's also anti-pop culture, if that makes sense. If it's
it's the rare film that is truly countercultural. Yes. The rare film that I don't think the producers realized it. I don't think, whatever the production company, Paramount or whatever, that produced this film, distributed this film, I don't think they realized it, but they were making something that was anti-capitalist. And truly, not just superficially countercultural, not just like Easy Rider light. There's a movie that was really taking aim, even more than I think Easy Rider, at the pillars and the cornerstones of society. And I guess there's a reason I mentioned at the beginning, there's not really a lot of other films like this. And it flopped like a pancake when it came out. Yeah. And people had really hostile reactions to it. Critics had hostile reactions to it. And I guess what did our favorite critics say about it? Our favorite critic being Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert, this is a recurring segment. It's a recurring segment here on the Pop of the Morning podcast, where we take a look at a contemporaneous review from the celebrated film critic Roger Ebert, man of the people. In his review, dated January 1, 1972,
fellow Midwestern boy,
he gave the film he gave the film 1.5 out of 4 stars, and he wrote, quote, "And so what we get finally is a movie of attitudes. Harold is death, Maude is life, and they managed to make the two seem so similar that life's hardly worth the extra bother. The visual style makes everyone look fresh from the wax museum, and all the movie lacks is a lot of day-old gardenias and lilies and roses in the lobby, filling the place with a cloyingly sweet smell. Nothing more to report today. Harold doesn't even make pallbearer." The tone of that review, even for Ebert, I think is the hostility and sarcasm and just contempt dripping from that review. you and I find ourselves disagreeing with Roger Ebert on almost everything. It's a very rare occurrence. We should go back and figure out. I think there's maybe only one or two films that we've reviewed that Roger Ebert agreed with our general perspective on the film. It's a very rare occasion where those kind of stars align.
Yeah.
But even for Ebert, that's a very hostile review. But he's not alone.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that Variety said that this movie was about as funny as burning down an orphanage. That's a pretty good line. I gotta admit that's a good zinger, and whoever wrote that, I hope that they felt very satisfied with themselves. But I think that hostility, it belays the fact that this is a movie that so many people just do not know what to do with. And we started this episode by talking about how this movie came to my awareness. And again, I don't know if that's how you learned about it. I feel like it was. I remember just being this man describing a movie about a young man and an old woman falling in love, and you and I being sort of creeped out but also intrigued by how weird and insane this movie sounded. I know it couldn't have been long after that I went and I found this at Blockbuster Video and rented it.
I'm not sure because
it seemed too strange to be real.
I think we were in separate math classes in high school. I can't remember having the same math class with you.
But either way, right? Like my point being that this movie has persisted. Mm-hmm. This movie, in the face of tremendous hostility from critics and audiences and the studio, it was like an accident that it got made, as you pointed out. And in despite of all of the odds against it, it's something that I think more than any other movie that I have ever seen or heard of, it has persisted, it's remembered, it's talked about because of word of mouth. Like in the most literal sense of that. It doesn't have a fan website. It got a few on the occasion of its 50th anniversary. It got a few write-ups here and there in film-oriented, press. Yeah. Mostly, again, just talking about how weird and unlikely it is. But it truly is a film that across half a century, I think continues to grow in esteem, based entirely on it's just the way it resonates with the quiet inner thoughts that maybe all of us have, or many of us have, about what is this life and what is this planet and what is this country and what is this society that I found myself born into. I didn't ask for any of this. And then those quiet negotiations we go through in our heads about, like, well, how much of this do I really need to cooperate with, participate with? I gotta say, it's now in the Criterion Collection as of 2012. It finally made a profit in 1983, 12 years after its release. It turned a profit finally. It was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry in 1997. As of the year 2000, the American Film Institute had it 45 on the list of 100 funniest movies of all time. It's a movie, I think, that has literally taken decades for people to begin in any kind of numbers to wrap their heads around. Yeah. And I don't know what higher compliment you could give to a movie than that. I'm saying it so fundamentally challenges your assumptions about things that you needed decades to wrap your head around. That's a rare film.
It's a very rare film. It's such a good film. Everyone should see this film, and they'll get a kick out of it. My mom was laughing, even though she was like, "How are you going to talk about this at the end of it?" Which, to be honest, I didn't know how we were going to talk about it at the beginning of this podcast. But, it's such a good film. People need to check it out. And I think this is one of those films that we talked about Wes Anderson's work being kind of like an entryway into weird indie projects. And while this isn't necessarily an indie project, I don't think he would fall under that. It is a weirder movie, and I think this is like one of those movies that, following something like a Wes Anderson film, and you're going, oh, what is this? Is weird and interesting, and wonder what else I could watch. Harold and Maude, I think, would be another step into that, artsy film, interesting intellectual film.
It's like
emotionally challenging film. You know what I mean?
It's another. Yeah, I know exactly. It's like another breadcrumb.
Yes.
Left on the path toward the realization that you are not alone in feeling out of place. You are not alone in wondering what's the point. You are not alone in feeling like, man, wouldn't it just be nicer if... and to me, again, like this is a movie you said you'd recommend it to anyone, that your mom enjoyed it. I agree. It's a movie I can't wait to show to my daughter in a couple of years when she's can maybe better get her head around it a little bit. It's the kind of movie I think that if you're willing to come to it with an open mind, it is maybe one of the most profound experiences you can have with cinema, because I think in tearing down so many of those cardboard walls that you so vividly described, it really does, I think, bring us all closer to each other, to our own humanity. Harold says in the movie, "Maude, you have a way with people," and Maude says, "Well, they're my species, right?"
Yes.
And I don't know what better note to end this discussion on. Like that's it, man.
Yeah.
You're all our species too.
Exactly.
And I hope you enjoyed the show. Phil, if people want more Pop of the Morning, how can they find their way to more Pop of the Morning?
They can go to cosmicblair.com and find all their stuff there. But I recommend clicking on the Patreon and supporting the network itself. That's going to allow us to create more Pop of the Morning material, as well as other related podcasts. So go to
content that you love.
cosmicblair.com, become a patron on Patreon, or you can go to patreon.com/cosmicblair. And for as little as $1,
feel like you don't
support us.
And if you feel like you can't even spare the $1, I understand. Times are tough out there. The best thing you can absolutely do, which costs you nothing but a little bit of human interaction, a little bit of human connection, is to spread word about our show, Pop of the Morning. The same way that my math teacher told me about Harold and Maude. Creative work thrives when people are talking about it. So if you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoy some of the movies or other pop culture that we discuss in this show, please think of a friend, think of a family member, think of someone you know at work, think of a student, think of somebody in your life who might appreciate this show, and say a few kind words about it to them. That's Pop of the Morning.
Yep.
Phil, on Pop of the Morning, on the next episode, what are we going to be talking about?
On a very special episode of Pop of the Morning, coming up next, we are talking about authority. We're talking about Air Force One.
That's some whiplash there.
Holy schmoly! Yeah, we're going.
I'm going from riding a stolen motorcycle with Harold and Maude to screaming at 500 miles an hour through the sky with Harrison Ford.
We had 3 relatively indie, interesting films with Rushmore, Chasing Amy, and Harold and Maude, and now we're going straight diving back into Hollywood madness with Air Force One. I mean, there's not much more you can get. More Hollywood than Harrison Ford on an airplane being the president. I mean...
That's about as Hollywood as it gets. That's about Hollywood turned up to 11. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? It's louder.
Yes. Oh, man.
Until that time, until that next episode where we hope you'll join us again, I remain Kathy Lee Gifford.
And I'm Phil. Just Phil. This has been Pop of the Morning.
Regis Philbin. Regis Philbin.
I couldn't remember his last name. I knew you were trying to go somewhere with it. I just wasn't catching on to it.
Yeah.
Anyways, this has been Regis Philbin.
Intercepting his own passes.
And Pop of the morning to you. Thanks for sticking with us. See you later. What do you want me to say?